One. I'd like to call to order our August the 31st, 2020 Board of Education special meeting work session for the Cedar Rapids Community School District. As a reminder, our meeting is currently being live streamed on the district YouTube channel. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Gary, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
This requires a roll call. Laurel?
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
Director Garlock.
Aye.
Director Merschbrock.
Aye.
Director Newman.
Aye.
Director Tominski.
Aye.
Director Borcherding, have you been able to join us or rejoin us? Doesn't appear so. And then President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we'll move to our consent agenda. Are there any items that the board member would like to pull for comment, question, or a separate vote? Oh, Jennifer's back on.
Sorry, issues.
Okay. Go ahead, Nancy.
Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
As a second?
I second.
Do we have any further discussion at all? This is a roll call vote.
Director Garlock.
Aye.
Director Merschbrock.
Aye.
Director Newman.
Aye.
Director Tominski.
Aye.
Director Anhalt.
Aye.
Director Borcherding.
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we'll move to administration. We'll consider the resolution for the reduction and removal of the commitment of general fund balance. Dave, do you have any brief comments?
Yes. When you commit funds, you have to, that actually reserves fund balance for other purposes that you have set up. And for in FY19, we committed funds for two purposes. One for the purchase of 20 vans, and that was for $536,680. And the other one was for the purchase and implementation of a new Infinite Vision software. And so when you commit funds, you also have to take board action to uncommit funds. So we are uncommitting the funds of the $536,000 for the vans because we had to purchase those vans. But we are going to reduce our commitment for the software because we estimated that cost for that first year to be, with implementation in that first year, to be $600,000. Of that amount, we have spent $461,850, so that leaves $138,150 that we had previously committed that we just want to still commit because we're not fully implemented yet. And that will actually take that out of any calculation for solvency ratio and those calculations that commits those dollars for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. This item requires us to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Now we'll move to learning and leadership. We'll have Superintendent Bush and Deputy Director Quaker, and the administrative team will provide an update on the Return to Learn plan and the latest information of post-Derecho.
Thank you, President Humbles. So the purpose of this presentation is twofold. First, the Return to Learn plan that we originally were going to deliver earlier in the month. And secondly, the post-Derecho interruption. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm hearing an echo. Okay. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this articulates those two primary goals, of course, and then also we do want time for discussion and questions from the board. So if we can move to the next slide. Just as a reminder, prior to the derecho hitting, and just as a reminder to our audience, we had to cancel 2 board meetings. One was actually on August 10th, the day that the derecho hit. And then the second was later, would have been a week ago, which we still were having complications for internet infrastructures and supports, not just in our district, but throughout our community, and had to cancel that board meeting as well. So this is really a condensed meeting, collapsing all of that information together. So prior to the derecho hitting on August 10th, we were going to review our families' choices for the return to learn plan. And these continue to be our anchors for the choices for our families, which is, of course, the health and safety of all of our students and staff, equity and a pronouncement for service for all families and students, pronouncing choice for our families, as well as listening to our staff and families' feedback throughout this whole process of options and even altering the return to learn plan as we've crafted it over the past couple of months. Next slide, please. So this is the data that came back to us earlier in the month to let us know what our families were choosing, which was going to help us make staffing decisions as we move forward as well. So this would have been about August 7th or 8th, would have been where this data came from. And as you can see, we have a little over 9,500 responses. Now we're up to 13,000, just so you know. But the percentages have stayed around the same in regards to what our families have been choosing. And so those who wanted the in-person option collectively were about 66% of our families. And then about 29% wanted our remote learning option that's offered pre-K through 12. And then CRVA, which is only a secondary option for middle school and high schools, we had about 4%. And that reflects about 419 students. Now we're up to about 700 students in CRVA, but that does not mean that the student is 100% enrolled in CRVA. It may be a couple of courses. However, that head count is tremendous, and we've had a lot of growth there as well. And you can see on the second box on the right-hand side of the slide, differentiates this by elementary, middle school, and high school selections. So if you go to the next slide, concurrently we had another survey, and that was for staff, and what staff both, and this is particularly looking at teacher and paraprofessional staff, who are the ones who are providing that direct support and instructions and instructional supports to students, what their preferences were for the working environment for themselves. So you can see the blue represents in-person, the red represents remote instruction, and the gold represents those who would go either way and said, I don't have a preference, I would do either. And then you can see also there is a small percentage of folks who needed leave for whether that be medical or other reasons. That is about 5% of 5 folks who needed that for teachers. And then we had a few more, 14, who needed that for paraprofessionals. We are finding that that number has increased slightly from the beginning of the month, but that was the data that helped us guide some of our decision making for staffing. So then we had that data and we had a plan, and then August 10th hit. And I think it's important that the board have documentation of that interruption. And so the purpose of this next couple slides is to let everybody get on the same page of what we experienced as a district. So of course, on August 10th, the derecho hit our community, devastated so many components of our community. Every single individual, I'm sure, on this screen had an experience with the derecho, personally and probably professionally. So 34 buildings, that's every single one of our locations incurred damage as a school district. And there was a continuum of those damages. Some were not so bad, but certainly we're going to need attention, all the way to significant damage where months and months of work are ahead. So All 31 of our schools incurred some of that damage. And so over the past several weeks, we've been using an insurance company who specializes in disaster relief specialists who've been on our campus since the day after the derecho, assessing all of our buildings. They are still here and they will continue to be here conducting those assessments. As well as, and that's for the physical part of the building. This also interrupted our return to learn plan, as well as the governor's proclamation to offer 50% of in-person instruction. We knew that we were going to need assistance from the Department of Education. And so I immediately reached out to them the day of the derecho, knowing that it was going to impact us. And honestly, it's been daily communications with the Department of Ed and the governor's office to support Cedar Rapids Community School District through this process. So the planning, of course, has included that insurance team, and also they've worked very closely with our buildings and grounds team and custodial team. The governor personally visited our school district, which included a tour of Kennedy High School, which is probably our most significantly impacted building. And between those conversations with the governor as well as the Department of Education, the governor did induce a proclamation on which was the continued proclamation of the pandemic. It wasn't a separate derecho proclamation, it's part of the pandemic proclamation, that she added a component of in Section 8 for schools that are impacted by the pandemic to have both instructional waiver opportunities as well as online instruction. We applied for waiver for instructional forgiveness as soon as that opened last Monday. And by Wednesday, we were given approval of that waiver, which is really good news for us. So here is our plan as we move forward. We were able to finally set a school start date by getting the information about which of our locations would be accessible. We prioritized elementary students because honestly, the majority of our elementary schools were okay for at least 75% capacity of instruction, as well as we believe that elementary students prioritizing their in-person learning, they don't need quite as much support for online instruction, or they would need more support for online instruction than our secondary students. So we will have a school start date of 9/21. Teaching staff will return this coming Wednesday for 8 days of professional learning support, as well as 5 days of preparation time for their own classrooms or online instruction. Our elementary age students will be offered in-person instruction. However, the families who chose online instruction for their return to learn plan will continue to have that option. We have about 15 schools that can house students in their designated elementary sites. And then the other 6 buildings will be hosted in 3 middle schools that can have capacity within their buildings. And that's Roosevelt, Wilson, and Harding. And then and just as a note, early learning, our preschool will start 1 week later. They'll start on 9/28. And then finally, because of the condition of our secondary buildings and because of the opportunity we have with online learning with secondary students, our secondary students will all start online. And as soon as the repairs of their buildings are secure, we will one at a time start getting kids back into those buildings in the middle school environment. The high school environment will take us some time. So kind of broke this down onto the next slide. So you can see by September 14th, we will be at 75% capacity in order to get staff back in buildings to prepare for students' return for those 15 elementary schools, the 3 middle school environments, and that it will also include the ELSC in which we are in right now, Metro and Polk. By November 16th, we should be at 75% capacity for the remaining elementary schools, which include Grant, Pierce, Hoover, Nixon, Kenwood, and Garfield. And then by the beginning of January, we should be completing the middle schools that were most damaged, and that's Franklin, Taft, and McKinley. And then, of course, all of our high schools, comprehensive high schools, Kennedy, Wash, and Jeff. So then also that meant that this significantly impacted our calendar days. So just as a reminder, the state requires 1,080 instructional hours. We choose the instructional hours process as a district instead of days. So that means that the time that we lost between 8/24, which was our original start date for students, and 9/18, which would have been, which is the Friday before our new recommended start date of 9/21, we lost approximately 114 instructional hours for students. So we did have built into our calendar an excess of 51 hours, which usually we use for inclement weather. A couple years ago, that really helped us out, and it also helped us last year. But we went ahead and grabbed those hours right away because this did qualify for an inclement weather situation. Therefore, we had 63 additional hours in which we requested for a waiver from the state. And then also knew that we may have to adjust our instructional day to be able to really make sure that we still provide high quality, comprehensive education for all of our students. So the calendar end date will remain the same, which also means that graduation date will be able to remain the same. Spring break and winter break will remain the same. And we had to adjust our end of the first semester and some of our professional learning days and conference dates in order to really balance what's needed to provide service to students and best instructional practices. So between some curriculum adjustments that we'll have to make, and we may have to do a little adjustment within the school day at the elementary and middle school level, adding about 10 minutes to their day, we'll be able to capture back that learning time. So then became the complicated process, and I'm going to hand this over to Deputy Superintendent Quaker, was we have now our family choices. We've had to reconfigure things because of the derecho, and then match our staff to our students who will be remote and or will be in person at the elementary level. So Deputy Superintendent, if you wouldn't mind talking about that process and where we've landed as of today.
So we've spent the past few weeks, the Human Resources Department, the Cedar Rapids Education Association reps.
Nicole, we can't hear you. Have you unmuted yourself?
I hear her.
Okay, I don't hear her. All right.
I have. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can.
All right. So our Human Resource Department, our building level directors, our Cedar Rapids Education Association reps have been working really hard. We have been in Cedar D spending lots of time talking about staffing and looking at staff requests for either remote learning or in-person learning and rematching everything up as things shift. The great news on all of this is the team has worked really well together. And the other great piece is that we are close to being finished with staffing placements. We have a few things we're working out yet today, but overall people have been assigned spots and placements, and we should be able to start the school year and get all that information communicated out. Just so everybody knows as well, there's been phone calls happening to those staff and conversations so people can ask questions. We also have a really good plan and process in place for the remote learning when staff have questions, as this is new to everyone. Ryan Reedstrom is taking on that challenge this year and working with lots of staff throughout our system, but the details and making sure people have those necessary supports in place to be able to meet our student needs when school starts, it is fabulous. Really excited about what that looks like for Cedar Rapids.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Quaker, and hundreds and hundreds of hours put into this very dynamic, complex organization and to really meet students' needs and families' choices. And a tremendous shout out to staff for their willingness to say, I'm willing to go that direction this year to support students. And as you know, for our secondary staff members and students, they don't get a choice as we open the year because of the derecho and the remote learning. So we know that we've got to front load things, hence those 8 professional learning days at the front end to really provide online support. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you, ma'am. So on the professional learning piece, these are kind of our 3 big rocks to support staff, is really Healthy adults who are supported can do better for kids, and our staff has experienced a lot of trauma themselves. So we have a love and care theme here to support our staff, and also putting some designated time into self-care and self-care strategies so that staff really are entering the year with a plan of what supports they might need personally for both their health, their social emotional well-being, and professionally. We also have a theme of trauma-informed care. And that was even prior to the Derecho hitting, that we were looking at trauma-informed care practices to support students, but now we're really applying it to staff as well. So social emotional learning is a huge rock for us at the beginning of the school year. Also, standards aligned instruction, we have to prioritize differently. The standards remain the same, but making those even more pronounced right now as our priority standards is huge, because we're instructing differently and we have a different amount of time. And so that is another emphasis that Executive Director Rice has been leading a lot of those efforts with our content leads to provide resources to to our teachers. And then finally, as Deputy Superintendent already pointed out, digital literacy and remote instruction, huge focus, as every child will have access to learn remotely and be given the resources to do so. Health and safety for the pandemic, of course, remains a constant. So social distancing, making sure all PPE equipment is supplied, and then good practices, of course, of hand washing and keeping surfaces clean. And then again, just being very mindful about those ratios and social distancing. Interestingly enough, when we got the data back, it looks like our ratio numbers at the elementary level, which was maybe the greatest concern area, will be really pretty good in regards to staff to student ratios. So again, these were our design principles as we looked at the curriculum and what we needed to do to adjust because of the instructional time that was lost in the spring, as well as now our current state of losing some instructional time this fall. So these, again, become our design principles as we looked at supports that staff would need in order to support students. And the next slide, please. So when we look at the remote learning model, we really broke it down by these particular grade levels, because each grade level not only needs some different strategies in remote learning, they also have different appropriate time spans that are appropriate for being on the screen. So the older a student is, the more screen time is appropriate. The younger a student is, the shorter amounts of screen time would be appropriate for them. And so we've adjusted supports and directions for staff who are teaching in those remote environments. And I just wanted to highlight one last thing, and that is the original Return to Learn plan was providing high schools with a hybrid model. Because we have to go completely online, we have redesigned the online model because all teachers will be teaching online at the high school, more than likely for the duration of the majority of the semester. And so we are adopting a traditional A-B schedule. That means that students will have access to all of their instructors in on-screen instruction every day with their own instructors. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see an A day would be, for example, periods 1 through 4. A B day would be periods 5 through 8. This will still be a block schedule, which allows for a little more flexibility within the online environment, and hopefully some more breaks for students, as there's best practices for online instruction and giving people screen breaks and things. So it's a different model than what we had originally proposed. And so wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that this evening as well. So lastly is the digital piece. As you know, we have provided resources for every student, K through 12. And those devices are in hand, and we're distributing those and have a process for that, which again had to be redesigned because of the Derecho. And then lastly, in addition to the digital hardware tools, if you go to the next slide, please. Oh, then maybe not, back one, is internet access, which has been a huge question. We secured, as you know, some hotspots, but also have a little bit of news to share. A shout out to the Corporation of Imon, who applied for a grant with us and a couple of the other local districts to secure internet access for families in their home. We just received word that they got that grant, and we will be able to provide some additional internet access with partnership with Imon for a good amount of students and families. So excited about that grant. And that's it. Questions?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Superintendent Bush, and Deputy Superintendent Quaker, and the administrative staff. We've all gone through a lot, and you guys have gotten us through it with all your hard work and your hours that you have spent looking out for our students, for our staff, for our community, so we can go on as a district. So I thank you all for the hours that you put in. Yes, this is going to be different, but we will be okay as a district. So I wanted to personally thank you. Also, for the board members, I'd like to kind of have like a round robin where if you have questions, if you could ask two, and we'll go around and ask questions to the folks here on our Zoom meeting. So we can begin with Vice President Borcherding.
Thank you, President Humbles. Can you hear me? I've had to switch devices a bunch of different times. Perfect. Great. Again, I would like to reiterate President Humble's deep thanks and appreciation of all the tremendous work that's gone into this, and would like to note that I am especially thankful that the strategic plan has been very mindful when considering all of these steps, looking at equity and student learning, accessibility. It's amazing what you've done in such a short time, and it's really helping us move forward as a district. So I will start with my two questions. I have more than two, but I will do my two and move on. And I think that this was touched upon when you were discussing the high school, the new high school schedule. And but I'm also wondering if it holds true for middle school. My question is, will middle school and high school teachers be teaching classes from their buildings, or will they have a mix of students from different buildings in their classes? In the past, it was discussed that somebody who's teaching 8th grade algebra or 8th grade math might be teaching 8th grade math remotely to students from a bunch of different buildings. So I'm wondering, are those teachers now going to be aligned directly with students from their building, or is it going to be mixed from students from different buildings?
And I'll lean on Deputy Superintendent to also respond. So we are, it's going to be both. So those who chose the Return to Learn plan online option originally, pre-Derecho, we had to secure and designate instructors for them K through 8, just as we had planned originally. And I'll just use an example. Wilson will originally be housing 2 elementary schools. As those elementary schools get back on site, which we have hopes that will be in a few weeks, those 2 elementary schools that are designated to Wilson are Garfield and Grant. As Garfield and Grant go back to their schools, Wilson will have the opportunity to bring their students back on site. So as they come back on site, the folks who were teaching remotely and had to teach remotely, let's say by October 15th, we get early access to Wilson. Then those families who chose online instruction still need that designation opportunity. So we still in K through 8 designated online instructors for the families who chose that as their original selection. And then we also know that the rest of the teachers also have to start out of the gate with online instruction.
Okay, so when middle school kids are going back into buildings, they will return with, they'll be getting remote instruction from the same teachers that they will be receiving in-person instruction when they resume buildings.
Yes, because we wanted to make sure those relationships were secured from the very beginning for those who chose online instruction.
Gotcha. What about high school? Same thing?
High school it had a different plan from the beginning because their teachers could teach remotely by section. And so unless they chose CRVA, the remote option learning would have still been with their designated instructors. And Executive Director Phillips can clarify any of that. But so if I chose online learning, I am a junior student, I would have been getting that access with online with my teachers. I would have been dialing into the classroom. So it was a little different design at the high school level.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, so just building on that, our teachers that are teaching remotely, are they going to be teaching from their homes, or will they be teaching from ELSC? Or are they teaching from buildings? How is that going to work?
Deputy Superintendent, we just got out of that meeting a little bit ago. Why don't you answer that one for us?
Okay, so we're going to be flexible with staff and their needs. Initially, our plan was that those that have health reasons, of course, would not report to the environment and teach remotely. But those that had just, maybe some of them said we could teach remotely or in person, or we prefer the remote environment, but they didn't have a health reason not to come back. Our plans were to utilize staff initially that we hadn't put out to everybody because of collaboration and support and the virtual environment, making sure students got what they need. We were going to have them report on site. We've been having conversations. Of course, derecho occurred. We have buildings that can't all be utilized. So at this time, we're creating messages saying to staff, we're going to have you start virtual remote instruction from your homes if you so choose. If you need an on-site location where you need that internet access, or maybe it's additional supports, or I'm going to use a high school math team wants to really work together collaboratively, and we have the space to make sure that they can stay safe and healthy within our buildings and our work sites, we'll provide that for staff. But again, we're allowing a lot of flexibility. Our goal is, as students can come back to buildings and be on site, that we also, of course, transition our staff to be on site to help support the learning of our students, with the number one priority of keeping everybody, of course, safe first and foremost.
Okay, thank you. That's my first two questions, and I will yield the floor.
Director Anholt.
Got unmute. Director Borsling actually took my two at this time. I'm just going to pass. Okay, but I do have an opportunity to come back, right? So.
Director Garlock.
Thank you. And thanks, Superintendent Bush, and to all of your team. I just want to echo what the other board members have already said. I know this has been a lot of hard work for all of you, and with the ever-changing situations that we find ourselves in, I appreciate all the extra hours that you've been putting in really since last spring. So thank you for that. I have my first question is about the insurance, and maybe this is premature, maybe we don't know the answer just yet, but will there be significant financial consequences to the district as we rebuild, repair the building? Since the damage seems to have been so vast, can we expect some financial consequences coming up?
Dave, I'm going to have you jump in on this.
This will be considered, even though the number is going to be quite large, this will be considered one event. And we have our deductible will be one deductible for all the damage that we have. And the piece that we're still trying to work through is determining how much of this is going to be FEMA related, how much of this is going to be insurance. Obviously, FEMA will not touch anything that insurance does. So, we'll be working with our insurance in establishing that. A lot of the cleanup that we're doing with trees, that will probably be FEMA. And even some fencing, a lot of times that ends up being FEMA. But we're still working through all of those items with our insurance and before we'll decide what is going to be FEMA, what's going to be insurance related. But lion's share of the repairs to our facilities will be insurance, and it will be covered with one deductible for all our facilities.
Okay, great. That's, I think, good news. At least for today, we'll say that that's good news.
Yeah.
My second question is maybe a little easier. So for kids that are for middle school and high school that are doing online completely, do we still provide lunch to them? And will it be a similar situation as what we did last spring where they pick up lunch, or what's the plan for lunch?
Dave, I'm going to give it over to you again.
Right now, the summer feeding program model will work through end of September, but we will have to make modifications as soon as school starts. That summer feeding program will stop. But we just got some news today. We got some hoops to jump through. We're still trying to work out how we can do this. We just heard that the feds have extended that through December 31st. So we're still trying to figure out what things we have to get in place to make that happen. But it does sound like we'll be able to feed all of our kids, but we got some work to do, figure out what hoops we have to jump through to make that happen. And we're working through those right now. So.
Okay, good. Because I had read something about the USDA
Yes.
not being very cooperative. So I'm glad to hear that that policy has been changed. So thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Director Berschbach.
First question.
Can't. You're frozen.
Is about flexibility. I'm frozen.
So you're still good.
Okay, go ahead. You're fine. Go ahead.
My first question is about flexibility for families. Obviously, a lot has changed even since the beginning of the month. Are we going to be holding families to their original choice for return to learn? You know, say middle school students and high school students are coming back sometime in November. Are we going to hold parents to their choice? Are they going to have the flexibility, you know, given what's happening across the state with the pandemic right now? People's opinions might have changed about what's best for their family. So is that flexibility available for them, or will they be held to that original choice?
So I hope that we can remain flexible. In addition to being flexible with the family choice, the impact is the staffing part is so complex. So if we had a tremendous amount of folks switch to online, we will be okay, I think, at the high school level, just because of how we're delivering instruction. At the middle school level, we'll probably add more complex situations. So, and then in addition to that, those who chose the virtual academy, we had to designate staff to that as well. So I think that each individual family, we want to find out what their needs are, be as flexible as we can. But if we had hundreds of folks changing, that would impact staffing, and we would have to probably make some different decisions at that point in time. But absolutely, each individual family, we want to be responsive to their needs. And so if they originally were choosing in person and now they want virtual, we want to be able to support those choices as best we can.
My second question is, it seemed like you mentioned that elementary school students, as they were leaving the middle schools that they would be at, we would bring the middle schoolers back. But that makes it seem like different middle schools will be going back at different times in person. Is that the case? Have we considered, on the middle and high school levels, just saying, we're going to do all online for the entire semester and sort things out come next semester? Or are people going to be coming back at different times throughout the fall?
So we did have discussions about both of those pathways. I think I'm being echoey somewhere. I'm not sure. I I can hear myself twice. There we go. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so yes, we would. The idea about bringing them back as they become open is one, to hopefully use our resources as best as possible for transition. So just play out that same scenario with Garfield and Grant at Wilson. If Grant is the first to open, we will actually need transition time so that teachers can now set up their classrooms at Grant. And as Garfield opens, we'll need time for teachers to set up their classrooms at Garfield. And then we'll need time for the teachers to set up their classroom at Wilson. And so we could certainly hold off and try and do it all at once. But from a management point of view, and then also really honoring those family choices out of the gate, the sooner we can offer kids to be back in their own buildings, we thought would really be helpful for kids and for families. But we realize that creates individualized disruption within the system. We would be able to allocate resources, though, a little more readily that way in regards to moving folks and making sure that their classrooms were set up for instruction as soon as possible, instead of doing it all at once. Primarily, though, it was to serve families and their choices right as soon as we possibly can within their buildings.
Director Newman, can you hear me now?
Hear you. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank you guys too. I think we all want to thank you guys, but you guys must all be master yogis by now, because I've never seen this much flexibility out of anyone. So I can't imagine. So thank you so much for doing everything that you've done. So my first question might be a little bit premature as well. So I requested from Laurel today if we can see the damage report when we get it back from the insurance company. I'm wondering if we have opportunities to fix things, if this changes timelines on things. So if, HVAC is set to be replaced at, Van Buren, I'm talking just sort of hypothetically here, and it blew off the building, does this give us an opportunity to rework some of that FMP plan and make some of those improvements that were planned? And do we anticipate timeline changes? Like, for instance, the construction site at Coolidge, did that get impacted?
Dave, do you want to comment on some of that?
Yeah. I'll take your second part first. Yes, Coolidge, the construction site, there were some walls that did tumble from the derecho. So yes, that will impact. And John, I see that you're here. If that was like 2 to 3 week delay, potentially impact to the schedule, is that what you're hearing, John?
Yeah, we're probably 4 to 5 weeks, Dave.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, 4 to 5 weeks is what I'm being told, but I know they're doing what they can to continue to condense schedule. So we'll see what happens there.
But I don't believe, Jen, because I think you were alluding to, can we take some monies that would typically be used for insurance to bring one of these buildings back to where it was, kind of, and use those dollars for something else? I don't believe we're going to have that type of flexibility. I think to do that, I think insurance is there to try to rebuild what you have back to what you had before. And that's what the insurance is going to be there for. And, yes, we're going to have, there are some roofs that we're going to get to replace that needs to be replaced. That was maybe on our near future of roofs that we were going to do. And that's actually probably going to save us money in the long run on that, because the insurance is going to pick up that tab instead of our normal expenditures. So there's kind of give and take, kind of like on your home. When you have something, sometimes you benefit from that. You're going to have to re-roof. Oh, I get a new roof. The insurance picked it up, type of a thing. And so we're going to have some of that, but we also know that there's going to be some things that, as we dig into the finishes and whatnot, hopefully we that all works smoothly. We haven't got that far yet. I'm hoping that works smoothly for what we end up doing. But there's a lot of work yet to be done on that front. And we're just at the beginning stages of that. So.
Okay, thank you. My second question kind of similar to what Director Merschbrock asked. In the slides, it talked about the three comprehensive high schools being back at 75% capacity around January 4th. Do we anticipate launching the earlier return to learn plans at that point in time with the in-person options at all our schools, basically, at that point?
Executive Director Phillips and I were just talking about that yesterday, weren't we? I'm going to hand that over to you, Cynthia, if you want to discuss that transition time for the high school.
I think there are certainly things that we will have to consider depending on what the state of the health crisis is in our community at that time. So what we do know is in our plan, we have a variety of phases depending on what that health status is. And then we would review that when the buildings are ready to be opened to see if we still need to or how much we need to mitigate the numbers in a building.
Easy to kind of forget that's all going on sometimes. So yeah, assuming that maybe numbers are, let's hope getting better. The hope is to have those options available by essentially second semester.
So then what we will stay with for sure is our 8-period day that we've developed our master schedule around and the AB block experience in order, again, to keep the focus on 4 classes on A day and 4 classes on B day. And so we do plan to keep that. That goes back to the availability of our master schedule and still being able to offer all of our courses through that.
Thank you.
Director Tominski.
I was wondering if there was any directors left. I thought maybe I'd be 7, but a couple of things. One, I mean, I just want to echo what others have said that, you know, I feel like I get pulled over all the time in the community where people are like, you picked a really wonderful year to run for school board, which is true for three others here. But I always tell people that the heavy lifting and the hard work is really done by staff. So I just can't commend you guys enough. I mean, to get through a pandemic and to get a derecho thrown on top of you, and you know, it's only August, you know, it's almost September, but who knows what's coming next. I just know that this team seems to be prepared for anything. Yeah, I don't want to wish that on anybody. I'm just, it's hard enough as it is. Really excited to hear about the IMON grant, local company doing great things in this community. Just, you know, Patrice Carroll and her team are just phenomenal. So to have them as a partner, can't say enough great things. So I was really excited to hear that news. I just want to ask a specific question. So when I, you know, hear about the damage, right, at first, you know, it's, it seems like it's almost a little bit better than we had initially, at least what I was initially hearing. But it's still really bad, you know. So specifically about elementary schools, we've got 6 less elementary schools. We're going to use 3 middle schools. Kind of curious about classroom space in general. I mean, is that a net loss? Is that a net gain? And then really the very specific question is, what's the best estimate on what the student to staff ratio is going to be for elementary when they're in person?
And I would invite John Galbraith at any time to pop in on the structural part of this. And then I'm going to ask Deputy Quaker to discuss the student to staff ratio of what we're seeing so far from the staffing point of view with any of the executive directors who've been analyzing that data as well. But as we looked at, and even honestly, maybe Quaker, I'm going to have you do all of this, Deputy Superintendent Quaker, as you guys were looking at staffing, you had it down to the number of kids in classrooms and ratios when we were looking at staffing. So maybe I'll just have you take the whole thing. I'm going to hand it over to you.
So there's been a lot of moving parts. First and foremost, the in-person learning, of course, we want those small numbers. So in elementary, we've shifted people around. Linda and the HR team have had to do a lot of movement because people are changing their mind. They learn more about virtual and maybe they're like, oh, I'm going to shift to in-person and vice versa. Again, our focus has absolutely been to keep small in-person class sizes. That also means that our virtual environments have more students than they do in person for those health and safety reasons. We are still getting people, like we've shut off that people as staff can say, hey, I need to move now. And we haven't done that because we don't want to be flexible. We just can't keep recreating what those class sizes look like. At the elementary, there are some that are around that 20 number. It's higher than we'd like. There's also some that are lower, that are around the 12 or 13 number. Again, it's having enough people and balancing everybody out. We're thinking that once this all starts, there's going to be some movement from virtual to in-person and vice versa. And it's going to be really important that people understand and are patient that it's really hard to be moving students around with the COVID pandemic still out there, keeping small in-person class sizes and being flexible to meet student and parent needs along with staff needs is an intricate balance that we have in place. But right now I'm confident in where we're at. The principals know where their numbers are at. I believe people feel good about that. Even the staff that are assigned to a lot of those rooms know where their student numbers are, but just realize that they could move a little bit. We're hoping not much, but again, they could.
So when we were able to assess the number of students that needed to move from, say, Grant Elementary to Wilson, there are a lot more classrooms at Wilson than there are at Grant. And so putting the number of students and sections needed at Grant and Garfield, there's a lot of space available at those middle schools. So we were able to accommodate that. But that also means a 6th grade classroom and their resources does not look like a kindergarten classroom and their resources. So it's not just the classroom itself, it's the physical furniture and equipment that needs to go with those kindergartners and 1st graders. 2nd, 3rd to 5th, we have probably some more flexibility with using those middle school resources and furniture, but the littles really need little things. And so we know that we're going to have to need to move furniture and equipment for those spaces. Does that answer your question, Director Tominski?
And Superintendent Bush has a good point that I didn't touch on, sorry. So when John Galbraith gave us that information on classes, we made sure that we had plenty of space, but you're right, it's moving the things afterwards, but we're not worried about not having a space in those middle schools to appropriately distance and keep staff and students separate. There's definitely more classrooms available.
Wasn't me. I appreciate it. I think that does answer the question. I mean, obviously hearing 20 makes me nervous. The staff that's involved with that, if they're comfortable, I guess that, that's good to know. Like, I mean, the fact that the buildings know kind of what they're looking at and people know what their assignments look like. Obviously safety needs to remain the top priority. And I know it is. I just know that working with all these moving pieces is, I seriously have no idea how you guys do it. It's amazing. We were talking a little bit about space for teachers. So if they're remote teaching, maybe they are not doing it from their home. It sounds like there's been some movement on that in the last day or so. So I'm curious more, is there space for students? So students in middle school and high school specifically that do not have an in-person option. Do we have any space identified where they may be able to go and learn? If there's a lot of reasons why a home might not work, and it's not just the internet access. So kind of curious if we thought about that. Our last board meeting, we were talking about community partnerships. I think this might be another interesting place to explore what those could look like.
This is definitely an area we've been working intentionally on to provide opportunities for secondary students, a place to go for that internet support. So we're working with community partners, drafting out a plan. We have quite a few already, just working on the details. They're also helping with some volunteers. And then we have also staff that are going to be getting paid that we could assign to those sites. So really right now figuring out locations throughout Cedar Rapids to have accessible and available for, again, all of our secondary students. And we should have that draft and plan in place by the end of the week to start communicating out to families.
Great. If there's any place that I can be of assistance, like we were talking last board meeting, I'd love to be able to assist you and the team. I think that covers my 2 questions, President. Back to you.
Director, Vice President Borcherding, do you have another question? Some questions too?
I do. Thank you. My next question, we just in our agenda, we approved an amendment agreement for the Millwright and Technical Engineer Pre-Apprentice Program, which is great because we're maintaining our pathways for our graduates. I just want to make sure that with our change in date and change in our start date, I'm wondering if that's influencing our ability to collaborate with outside partners like Kirkwood for our concurrent enrollment.
John Rice, maybe if you want to jump in here, Executive Director Rice, on some of those adjustments we've made, but then also there are opportunities that have been created for some students. They've got started before everybody else. So I'll hand it over to John to explain.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I heard 2 questions there. One was kind of around Kirkwood and one was more around our other community partners. Students who were taking classes on Kirkwood campuses, who had planned to do that, started today. Other students that are taking concurrent classes within our high schools will start on September 21st. And because our high school classes meet more frequently than a Kirkwood class, it's every day versus once every 2 days or something, we're not as worried about the hours being covered. Students will still be able to meet all their hours with our high school Kirkwood class. And my recollection from the report I saw last week is only about 10 students are taking any Kirkwood classes on site. And those are students who are in programs that do require on-site automotive type work. And so there's a handful of those, but the vast majority of students are taking those classes online, even though it's with Kirkwood starting today. In terms of our external partners, some of them we were able to make modifications to our contracts. And so we've been able to say, we know we can't have you coming into our schools to do some music instruction because of the way we're cohorting and the way we're keeping students safe. Please don't come to our buildings and then go to 5 other buildings and teach music. Instead, let's figure out a way we can do this with some online lessons or some Zoom type things that are synchronous. So other ways to carry out those partnerships, and some partnerships may just be on pause for part of the year. Just really depends on how we can modify accordingly. Great questions.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're being mindful to make our pathways, that we're maintaining our pathways for our graduates. And along those lines, just wondering if we're still able, with our student alignment, our standards alignment for our student learning, if we're still able to offer the same kind of robust AP programming and other opportunities for our students to then pursue college, or
we are going to, of course, still offer those. It's going to look different this year. I believe the calendar of school days is 160 currently as opposed to 180. So, obviously there's 20 days that are not there that come before AP tests. And so that'll certainly be an impact. So in addition to fewer days, we also had less learning from March, and we have remote learning, which limits the amount of screen time you can do. So 3 factors are working a little bit against us. That said, our teams of teachers have been working hard all year long on defining the most essential learnings for each class and each grade level so that they can make sure that those are prioritized. And so if you're teaching a social studies class, you may typically teach Jacksonian democracy and the War of 1812 and the Monroe era. You may shorten that down to more of a focus on cause and effect and pick one of those topics instead of all 3. And so there will be a narrowing of focus to the essential learning that still covers our standards, but does reflect that we are down some days.
The additional piece to that too, and John brought my attention to this last spring, the College Board, who oversees AP, has also created a lot of resources under the pandemic umbrella. We're not the only ones who have lost instructional time or will be quarantined and have to deal with remote learning. And so that organization has created a lot of resources for our AP instructors as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate the professionalism and the attention to detail and knowing the 3 factors that are going to influence the kind of opportunities, experience our students have, and being mindful of that, designing moving forward. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Director Anhalt, do you have additional questions?
I do. first of all, it seems that our COVID rate in Lynn County has not really stabilized yet. And as we move back, it seems that other school districts around the country, when they've come back, that there is an increase in it. Do we have any idea what our standards are going to be for COVID infection to go back into a quarantine situation for a building or for a class?
So our district health team has defined those in alignment with the guidance from the public health department. So, for example, if there is a positive case, then what you do is contact tracing. And if, say, that's a student, then who is that student in contact with? And then you go into the recommendations of quarantining. Depending on the scenario, you quarantine or not quarantined, and public health helps make those recommendations. So, and those are for 14-day time periods. So, and that also is when those situations happen. Iowa City is experiencing this right now in Johnson County right out of the gate for their beginning of the year plan because of the percentage rate in Johnson County. We would also follow those state guidelines for the percentage rate in Lynn County. And if we had to write for forgiveness from the state to go to online instruction, let's say this is post January 21st plan, because we have permission because of the Derecho to do online instruction, then it would be 14 days at a time. It's not for long periods of time. You have to ask for permission for every 14 days. So we would use the plan from public health and then what's under the DE guidelines.
When you say public health, do you mean Lynn County Public Health?
Yes,
Okay.
but they're following the state guidelines as well. Yeah.
Okay. The other one is, it seems that particularly at the middle school levels, a lot of disruption for students and staff to move classes in and out. And for some cases, could be a very short period of time, a 2-week period, possibly, moving all of the furniture in, moving all the furniture out, teachers having to remove their things from their room in order for another classroom to set up inside. I just wondered if there's any thought, anything that could be done to unify that more. Maybe doing it at Thanksgiving, I guess, staying out for a longer, then moving, and then it would give, there would be a period of time to make for an easier transition. And then I wonder about bus schedules. Where are we at with bus drivers? It's kind of a separate question, but it's involved with all of the rest. We have enough bus drivers and constructing those busing routes to go one place and then converting back afterwards. A lot of work ahead.
Indeed, a lot of work. So I would say that we certainly want to remain open to what those transitions look like. The reality is, I think that a lot of the middle school furniture and equipment is appropriate, maybe not for the littlest learners. And so assessing what those spaces look like in our middle school environments and which classrooms will be most affected. We haven't gotten to that level of detail just yet. That's the next step, is to get to that level of detail. John Galbraith's team has been tremendous in kind of assessing what those environments are and what's possible. So absolutely, we want to provide staff as much time as possible that they need to move in and move out, and making it as easy as we possibly can, knowing that it's for a temporary time. And so it's not the kindergarten classrooms that are going to be in the middle schools are probably not going to have every single bell and whistle that they usually have for those several weeks that they'll be in those environments. And then also, I think this was said earlier, we're having some surprises of how quickly we might be able to access our buildings. So that's our greatest hope, is that we'll get access more quickly than we anticipate. But during the transitions, we do recognize that people are going to need time. So that means for a couple of days, we might have to recommend that children are online instruction for a couple of days while we're actually moving buildings and reorganizing. Or utilizing online instructors. We haven't gotten through those details yet, but we know that people are going to need time to reset up classrooms, and that absolutely it's a pain. We get that. We're just trying to focus on what might be best for students. Yeah. We have other staff, as Laurel was just saying, we have warehouse staff that will assist in moving. We actually have probably some high school staff members who are not instructors, who will actually have some availability to assist probably with elementary environments. So maybe that can help with the class size reduction, et cetera. So we're trying to think about those factors as well.
Just one.
Transportation, your transportation question. Dave, I can have you hop in on this as well. As in some of our most recent assessments, we've had some improvement, but it's still going to be tight. I'll hand it over to Dave.
It's going to be tight with transportation, but one of the things that we mentioned that we are still looking into is with some of our elementaries, we'll probably have to do a staggered start time for our elementary schools to be able to make this work, which will help us on our bus driver shortage as well. So that's something that we're going to have to be looking into right now. To do that, we will, you think about some of these elementaries that we're looking at, when we move into a middle school, that requires 100% transportation of all kids eligible, of all those kids, because they are now outside their 2-mile walk zone. So the only way that's at all feasible is by staggering bell start times to be able to accommodate that. So we are looking into that as we speak. And I did talk to Scott about how much time do you need to change things. If we were to do something, they would actually create a whole separate routes, pretend like it is new routes they're doing for the temporary start times. And then for some of those, and then when they go back to their school, it's just a kind of flip of a switch almost, and they go back to the normal routes that they have also scheduled. So they're building more routes to accommodate that, but it's a much quicker turnaround than what you would think to get them set up for going back to the normal schools, because they have been working on the normal schools routing. So it is a pretty quick changeover, and they felt like they could do probably a couple days with the weekend and have it ready for that Monday. So
thank you. I have one
Director,
more comment if I could.
I'm sorry, Gary, we're trying to keep it to 2 each, so if you could, we could
I passed the first two. This is just it's not really a question. It's just a comment that I know there's a lot of work have to do, but I'm hearing mixed messages that are coming out, misdirections, and I hope that as we move forward that there's more centralized in the communication and less mixed messages that are being sent. I understand we're in a very fluid time, but pretty frustrating for staff to hear one thing and then 2 days later it's changed. Thank you.
Director Garlock.
Superintendent Bush, a little earlier in the meeting, you mentioned the fact that the virtual academy enrollment had gone up significantly. I'm just wondering about the teachers for those additional kids. Are those teachers that were already in our system and have now moved to the CRVA, or are these new teachers that we're finding somewhere else?
It's all shift of our own staff because we haven't added a lot of students in regards to, at least at this point in time, we don't know what our total enrollment increase is. So it's really shifting our own staff to be CRVA instructors. And then maybe John and the executive directors, I don't know if Adam's on tonight, but Executive Director Phillips can comment on this. We're still figuring out some of those assignments. And so it could be that it's part of an assignment. So I'm a teacher at the high school level. I'm an English teacher, and I might be teaching 4 sections of Language Arts 10. I'm a Jefferson High School teacher. And then I might have some sections of Virtual Academy. We've done stipends for teachers in the past to have those sections. And so we're still trying to assess without disrupting the entire master schedule at the high school. It just gets super complex. So the hope is that we have designated instructors, which I think, John Rice, you can comment on how many we have designated so far. But there was a need of about, I think it was 8 to 10 full-time positions in regards to the number of sections that we needed at the secondary level. John, was that about right?
Yep, we currently have, I believe, I'm doing quick math in my head, 8 teachers currently assigned full-time to the Virtual Academy, 1 counselor. As Superintendent Bush mentioned, there'll be an additional split FTE and maybe even some short-term contracts depending on enrollment numbers. Obviously, if there's only 45 students taking art, it's hard to justify a full-time art position. You'd want to do something more of a short-term. And if there's 200 kids in a particular class, then we want to think about that differently. So having really good conversations with Director Phillips, Director Zimmerman, and Deputy Superintendent Quaker on those kind of topics as we hash out numbers as they settle up.
Okay, thank you. I don't really have a second question, but I do just want to thank you for reassessing the places where our remote teachers are expected to remote work from. I think especially since our priorities for our return to learn plan, the number 1 priority was health and safety. So I'm glad to hear that we're allowing staff to do their remote teaching from where they feel safest. So thank you for being flexible on that.
Thank you. Director Merschbrock, do you have any questions, additional questions?
Yeah, the last question I had was just, was there any thought to extending the calendar out farther into June to reclaim some of that learning time that we're losing? I know we've had it waived, but given the amount of learning time that was lost in the spring and losing learning time now, would we extend it out? And if we aren't, do we have everything in place to make sure that, obviously with high school students, you can make sure graduating seniors, make sure that they're on course for their credits and everything like that. Are we making sure that our younger students are, I know we've talked about narrowing the instruction to meet standards. Are we going to have the time to do that? It makes sense to me. It seems like our staff will be able to do that. But I was thinking of it from the bigger picture point of view. That's a lot of lost time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so weighing all those factors in, some of that is it's amazing when you add the 10 minutes, just that 10 minutes to the day, that gains us about 50 hours of instructional time over the entire year. And so that's sometimes in the past how we've regained some of that inclement weather time. And I realize it's not quite the same as a whole day of instruction, but that's also kind of what Executive Director Rice was explaining, the difference between the Kirkwood classes, that when you add those minutes per week, it adds up over time. The block schedule at the high school actually gives us more instructional time because it has fewer transitions than a 7-period day. So some of it is we're getting the minutes back, but not the complete days. And since we do hours of instruction versus days of instruction, it did help somewhat. The other complication was according to Iowa code, the seniors cannot have fewer than 5 instructional days than the rest of the population. And so we could have adjusted graduation to be bumped down into June. So that was something we were considering, but it creates a whole other domino effect. And so that was one of the considerations, is keeping that rule in mind, as well as staff contract days. And so the continuing to compensate staff during some of this crisis time, and then we would have had to probably put in like what would have been maybe a fall break or a September break, and it could have made that time up in June, was another consideration. But then also we'd looked at the losses that we had this summer in regards to our summer programming, Kids on Course, the university program for the gifted and talented programs, as well as some of our at-risk programming. We would have had to shift all of that for next summer as well. So it all was a consideration. So we opted to look at adding those 10 minutes to the day instead of adding the calendar days at the end of the year. But all of those were factors that complicated that June extension time. But you're absolutely right. It could have been another solution for us.
I don't have any more. Thank you, Superintendent, and everyone else for answering questions.
Director Newman.
Sure. So staffing seems to be the theme of this round. We had a sizable personnel report, but I realize we're looking at multiple months there. How are we sitting on staffing overall? Are we in a big push because we need a lot more people? Are things evening out or somewhere in between?
Linda.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So from a staffing perspective, we are in the best position we've ever been. And that's just because we haven't had the needs this summer due to just in some ways the virtuals helped us because we've had more in a virtual setting, like in a para situation. In a virtual setting, a para can have more students because they don't have those brick and mortar buildings that they're in. So they can have 6 students instead of 1 student. So the minutes are a lot less. And so we're actually doing really well in our staffing from a para. Always have a few teacher positions open. Transportation continues to be a challenge for us. I think it will always be a challenge for us. But with the secondary going online, we're able to use some of those transportation differently as well. And then we're sitting really well right now with our food nutrition. So we're actually doing pretty good.
Great. I was afraid you guys were going to have to enlist the school board members to drive buses. So I'm glad that's not happening. So.
I'm sure it might down the road. I think once we get going and school gets started, you'll start to see the ripple of all of that. But right now, the hiring is secondary to all of this other planning that has to happen. And so I think we're just sort of seeing where everybody lands, and then we'll know what our true needs are. So I'm sure more to come for sure.
Know that opportunity can always exist for you anytime.
Always. Or a bus attendant. Be a bus attendant.
Maybe a bus attendant, but you don't want me driving. My other question is, I don't know, maybe this is just more an editorial comment, but not this year, because right now we're just trying to survive this year and get everybody the education that they deserve. But does this open the door to looking at potential opportunities for innovation? And I'm thinking more kind of at the high school level, as our high schools, have some things that they sort of specialized in. When Director Borcherding asked about like decoupling from the high schools, if that was going to be something we do this year, do we have an opportunity to be thinking about that from an innovation perspective of how maybe our high schools can start to specialize and maybe they're a mothership for a student, but they take part of their classes virtually or in person through a different opportunity within our district?
We've had a lot of conversation around that. It's like, what's the silver lining in all of this? And that is when you're forced to do things differently, then you think differently, and you got to innovate differently, and you do things differently. And when you're doing things differently, it impacts how your former practice. And so I do think that those possibilities are definitely there. I think what we're going to have to think about is that constant reflective practice of what is, I used to think and now I think, even in this moment of having to change our practice. But Cynthia Phillips and I were just having this conversation recently about, we believe this disruption will actually it forces us to change how we're doing some of our things at the high school level, all the way to going from a 7-period day, which we thought it was going to be monumental to have to change to a block schedule. Well, here we are. In a couple weeks, we made a schedule, and now we've got to make it happen with the staff that we have. So absolutely. And then I think also that New Hampshire, years ago, they just said anytime, anywhere learning, right? It can happen anywhere, any place, anytime. But there's some other constructs that we would have to consider to really get, to blow the roof off of innovation. And some of that is, staff has contracts, and we have the traditional calendar where people have summers off. So we could even think innovatively about how we're serving staff as well. And it's exciting. I do see the hope spot in it as well. And I don't know, Cynthia, if you have any other comments there.
I have one brief comment on that. On our high reliability schools framework, level 5 is a competency-based system, and I think some of what you're sharing speaks to that. I think one of the opportunities we've seen this year is that if we are creating so many online courses that students will be able to take, we do have now a series of lessons and units and ways to measure our standards that can build us up towards that level 5 of the high reliability system. So I think we're trying to determine what are the benefits to this approach, and that can work within our system long term. And I think having these great classes that all of our teachers are contributing to and adding to and building out and utilizing now gives people a different mindset for future shifts, whatever those may be.
Thanks. Also, interesting analogy, blowing the roof off. I don't know if I'd use that one.
I'll tell you, it's probably the trauma in my own head.
Director Tominski, do you have another question?
Yeah, if I can. I just don't want to lose what I think we were talking about when Director Newman was talking, but if the board is looking for some team building and if we all want to collectively get our CDL, I'm in favor. I think it would be a great way to work together and help. That is not my question.
Well, you used one. No.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Hey, I wanted to ask a question just in relation to, we talk a lot about academics, but talk about athletics and then arts and how those decisions are made. And just in full transparency, like our household is both, right? We're arts and athletics. The kids participated in a cross country meet over the weekend. Everybody was super happy to do it, but I know that the arts programs don't seem to be kind of functioning the same way athletics are. So just curious of how those decisions are made and what families can expect going forward.
So there is a difference between extracurricular and co-curricular, and many of our arts programs are co-curricular courses, which means that they are in alignment with a course that we teach. So for example, show choir is a course, and then there's some things that they do outside of class for that activity. Same thing with marching band. And so early on in June, some of the statewide competitions that are built around those fine arts programs, both marching band and show choir, were canceled at the state level. So that doesn't mean you can't have a program, but it means that you probably won't be competing with that program. So we actually went to our experts who are our fine arts teachers on what would they recommend. And I think that many of them that, well, then if we can't do this, then maybe there's some other things that we could do and provide unique experiences for our students for the curricular course. And so they have been meeting over the summer, and we're making some plans. And then now all of their spaces have been impacted by the Derecho. And so now they're at that next level of what's possible with online instruction. And so Marching band certainly has some opportunities, some ways in which they could even practice outside once their courses get started. Thinking about our halftime or football games, a pregame, to provide those opportunities. But they're coming back to their courses and what can they do within their courses to provide that learning. Whereas athletics have a whole other set of rules, and it's extracurricular, not co-curricular. And their seasons start earlier. You just mentioned cross-country meets happened last weekend. Football games happened early. And under the state guidelines as well as the national guidelines, you have to have so many practices before you can compete. So that was pressing us to have earlier decisions at the state level that guided our local decisions. I do think that we are going to need, so all that's happening behind the scenes over the past couple months. I just talked to Executive Director Phillips on Friday about this, some clear communications about what families can expect for the fine arts here this fall. Absolutely a priority, passion area for us. The complication is the co-curricular component of this. And I imagine John Rice's team has had some conversations around this as well. Our music facilitator is out of his department. It's like a little more complex because they're also co-curricular classes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just know that I got a sense of disappointment throughout the community as you're seeing football games, take place. And we went there for senior night across our senior got recognized just being out there, and it's hard to imagine that social. Not on the field. That strikes me as not 6 feet, but it's just kind of curious of like what kids can expect and. I know that our kids thrive in arts, and there's a lot of kids that do. So getting that back, if we can do sports, to be able to do that. Second question, if I can I get some clarification on what 75% capacity means? Like, is that like more insurance related? Is that something that like a building's open, expect 75% population, 25% of the roof is missing, but we can fit 75%? Like, just kind of curious on clarification, because I saw that term come up a lot in the presentation.
John Galbraith, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so that just came from our disaster company. So obviously the big push has been to get back into as many buildings as possible to try to create some sense of normalcy for everybody. So they do this kind of work all the time, and that's kind of the threshold they use for when typical occupants can be back in the building. So 75% might mean, the gym's missing. It's I don't want to say 75% is even like a perfectly clear number, square footage wise or anything like that. But just from their perception is, hey, we can get back 75% of the building. We're going to go ahead and do that and make everybody's life as normal as possible. Does that answer your question, I guess?
Yeah,
It's about the space. It's about the amount of space available, which also would then dictate the amount of people within that space.
And obviously, I'm just in the world of safety, right? It's just that because my brain immediately thinks if 25% of the building is unused, you're missing like 25% of the roof. It's hard for me to imagine that is safe. There's obviously ways to make it safe, but I'm sure the people that are in charge of those decisions are prioritizing safety. I just want to make that. Okay. And I think that covers my two. So back to you, President Humbles.
Thank you. I'd like to wrap up with each one of our board members. If you have a final question that you need answered this evening, and I can begin with Vice President Borcherding. Can't hear her.
Jennifer, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Jennifer.
We can move on to the next person.
Can you hear me now?
Now
Yes.
we can.
Yes,
Oh,
we can.
okay. Sorry about that. So my remaining question would be around the community eligibility provision. I believe 21 of our schools this year qualified for that, and that is if I believe it's 50% or more of the school population qualifies for free or reduced lunch. The entire school receives free and reduced lunch. It's through the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. So I'm wondering, some of those buildings are not usable, so I'm wondering, do those CEP dollars follow students, or will those schools be distribution sites, or what are we going to do to make sure that our students that are in need of that service are able to receive it?
Dave, I'm going to swing back to you on this. Part of this, it will be the distribution of it's like the continuation of the summer programming as Dave explained earlier. But the CEP part of this, Dave, I'm going to have you respond.
Based on what this came out from USDA, we might be able to continue to feed all of our kids like we did in the summer and the spring, where it was just free to all. And so it doesn't, so based on that, if depending on the hurdles we have to jump through, it might be as all of our students are at a CEP school. So that's kind of what we're thinking, how that will end up working. But if if a school is not usable, some of the schools may not be usable that are CEP from the school standpoint, but the kitchen still might be. So we might be able to serve out of the kitchens as well in some of those buildings that are currently right now are not available, but we might still be able to get part of it to be able to operate out of the kitchen, to be able to serve some food as well.
So just for clarifications, I believe Jefferson's a CEP this year, but that building won't be usable, and those students will be 100% remote, at least to begin. So, but we will find some way to provide that service to those students that need that.
Correct. They will be. We'll have a pickup of one way or the other. Yeah.
Director Anholt.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Gary. You're on mute.
Okay, now you can hear. All right, I want to take this time, instead of a question, just again to thank our administration, superintendent, and all of the directors on their work. I'm wearing my CR Strong shirt. We as a community, CR will come back from this, even as I hear chainsaws in the distance here still sawing up logs. But thank you for all of those, the administrators, everyone that is working so hard to make sure that we are able to safely open schools and provide education for our students and community.
Thank you. Director Garlock.
Yeah, I have no further questions, but I will take a little liberty like Gary did. I want to thank the community for being as flexible and resilient as they have been through all of this. And I hope they continue to be flexible and resilient as we try these new ways of educating our kids. So thank you to everyone.
Director Merschbrock.
One more thing occurred with this final question. When we're having our high school and middle school students all online, do we have any plans, or can we add any component to encourage those students outside, of the school environment, which will be online anyway, to be responsible when it comes to wearing a mask, gathering? Obviously, we're taking precautions, with extracurricular activities. But what we've seen in the college towns here across Iowa now, with many students gathered together, I don't even know if it's necessarily the students in classes that is, becoming a problem, but high school students, I don't know if their social life is exactly like a college student, but you can imagine them, out in the community, in small groups close together. And so do we have anything like that to, encourage them to say, we're going all online because of this weather-related situation, but there's still, the pandemic out there, and preparing themselves in their own lives for that, will allow people to go back safely in person when the time comes. Do we have anything like that? Or
So yeah, we had created a lot of signage and teaching resources, especially for the in-person learning component, but absolutely emphasizing this even in the online environment for the sake of the community. I just made that note. I don't know if Executive Director Rice or Deputy Superintendent Quaker has the response to that. I'm not sure if that's been explicitly discussed with the online instructional piece that we're doing at middle school, high school, but I love that we definitely have the plan for in-person, but emphasizing it even with the remote environment as we support our community is continues to be really important. We have the resources. It's just making sure that we're delivering that in those first few weeks of instruction. Absolutely.
Director Newman.
Best way I can thank you guys right now is for me to stop talking and you guys to go eat dinner.
Director Tominski.
Yeah, I think that's the general theme. I'm just, as you get out in the community, you're seeing principals and staff and just, people in their neighborhoods doing the work. So it's just been great to, we know so many of these people, and then to read the stories and for them to get the recognition. And these aren't photo ops, right? These are people just doing the right thing. So seeing that is just, makes me so proud to be part of this district. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. And
yeah.
Well, my final comments is thank you, each and every one of you board members. Did you get that? I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, but I think you need it to.
Okay.
now we're not hearing her.
President Humbles, we can't hear you.
Okay, try that now.
Because I'm not saying anything. No. We had to make an adjustment here. But like I said, we are Cedar Rapids Community Schools District strong. We have come through this. We're going through it. And I do thank our superintendent and deputy superintendent and the staff. You guys are amazing. You've put in a lot of hours. And I know the community thanks you, our students, our teachers. We thank you so much for everything that you've done. And board members, you guys had great questions tonight. And I hope everyone listening who is listening that your questions have been answered. So with that, since we have no further business, we stand adjourned. Have a good evening. Thank you.